So what happens when total self-reliance feels safer than depending on anyone else? Today's video is another nervous system pattern video. I'm really excited to bring you today's because I think it's one that is not very understood, but it's probably really pervasive. So I'd love for you to share in the comments below if you see yourself in any of the following signs and symptoms of this pattern. And of course, after I'm done describing the pattern, I'll give you some tips about how you can interrupt this pattern or break it completely if you want to, but also why you may want to keep this one in part. So this is very intimate for me. I have a lot of close knowledge of this particular pattern. It's been with me for a really long time. And this pattern gets created when, typically in childhood, we don't feel like any of the big people, the adults, or perhaps even anyone else in our life has the potential, the possibility, or the capability to actually take care of us. So we become extremely self-reliant. And I'm not talking about at the level of even necessarily like feeding us or anything like that. So if you have a roof over your head and you have food on the table, okay, on some level you could argue, logically that you were taken care of in some way. But what I'm actually talking about is taking care of you psychologically, emotionally, and at the nervous system level. So at the nervous system level is really where we as a unique individual, as a unique soul coming into life with a personality and our own fears and core values, right? We actually create these nervous system patterns at the subconscious level typically, and often they have something to do with reality and some form of logic, but they're often somewhat illogical. And when you look back on them as an adult, you think, or you may think, they're a little silly or it doesn't make sense. But when you really dig into the nervous system and psychology, it begins to make sense at the psychological level. So with this pattern of extreme self-reliance and independence, like I said, we create this pattern when in childhood we don't feel like our core kind of nervous system needs for being taken care of are happening, and potentially even then get further ingrained, this pattern gets further ingrained if something really traumatic happens and you aren't taken care of through that. So you could certainly have this pattern be created, in my opinion, even if nothing extremely traumatic happened, but you felt psychologically kind of missed. You felt like you had to kind of take care of yourself at the nervous system level. Nobody was really seeing you for your own unique needs and making sure they were met. But if you had to actually take care of yourself like an adult should in childhood through something really hard or traumatic, potentially abusive, potentially violence, right? Something sexual trauma, if you had to actually walk yourself through that and get yourself through it, chances are pretty high that you could end up with a pattern like this. Now, you could end up with a lot of other patterns too, and not necessarily this, going through those experiences. So just because you went through experiences like that potentially doesn't mean automatically you're going to have this pattern. So here are the signs and symptoms that you may be at the nervous system level enacting out a pattern of total self-reliance or independence, which also manifests as a fear of depending on anyone else but you. So the first sign or symptom is going to be anxiety or perhaps even terror at the thought of potentially having kids or moving in with a partner or letting yourself actually fall in love, right? Because these things take us out of total self-reliance and being a self-contained unit where I know I can take care of me, but kids or another human that is going to actually threaten this pattern because I might need to depend on them for certain things, that could trigger this pattern. Now, another one that goes closely with this would be if you ever find yourself monitoring other people's behavior, but in particular people who are close to you in your life, especially an intimate partner, and especially one you either just moved in with or you currently live with. If you're unaware of this pattern in yourself, maybe you're still doing it, closely monitoring their behavior for signs that you can't depend on them. Because here's the thing about this pattern. If it's still going on in you, if it's still playing itself out, those two sides of it are married. You can't have this pattern of total self-reliance without also feeling like nobody else is dependable. I can't depend on anyone else. I have to do everything myself, right? And so we tend to actually at the subconscious level, maybe you're conscious of it, watch other people and actually notice all the ways in which they are just not dependable, right? So if you find yourself doing this, chances are you have this pattern, and I'm going to give you some tips about how to break this in the end. But as far as this particular sign or symptom of the pattern, I want to say right now, I hope you're aware that by me describing this, I am in no way suggesting that those people you're monitoring are in fact not dependable. This pattern is about us. It's not about other people. And I'm going to circle back around to this at the end. All right, the third sign is going to be feeling totally at home and at ease by yourself, and maybe even preferring your own company to that of other people, right? Because you're so used to relying on yourself and being with yourself that actually you've made pretty good friends with yourself by this point. So you might be somebody who, maybe you think you need a lot of alone time. You may not actually, but it might be your preference due to this pattern. You may find comfort in reading and being at home by yourself. Maybe you like animals more than people, right? Because that actually gives you a sense of companionship and connection without triggering or threatening this pattern that we've learned to rely on of, not depending on other humans. So this is another sign or symptom. All right, and fourth might be being friends with a diverse group of people. Like I'm friends with someone from this group over here and then someone from this group over here. And maybe you even pride yourself on being friends with a wide variety of different types of people, but you don't actually have a close group of friends yourself. And, this is actually, in my experience, and I've had this pattern, comes down to, if I'm friends with a close group of people, we learn to rely on each other, right? For friendship, for connection, for intimacy, for support through hard times in life or good times in life. They're the ones who cheer us on. And so if I kind of just have a friend over here and one over here and one over here, at any moment I could go any of those places, but I don't actually have to depend on any of them. All right, the fifth sign or symptom that you may have this nervous system pattern would be judging other people for being too clingy and too needy, needing too much from you, relying on you way too much. And my God, could they just learn to be self-reliant? There's a lot of judgment that can come with this pattern because we kind of tend to think typically at the subconscious level before we become conscious of this pattern that the world would be way better off if everybody were just self-reliant, right? Because we've learned to get shit done and solve problems and make sure we're okay. And can't other people just make sure they're okay? Why are they coming to us with all their problems? Why are they blaming us? What's the deal with all this victim stuff? Ugh. So that can be a big sign or symptom of this pattern. And by the way, I'm really guilty of all of these. This is how I know this pattern so intimately, is because this is one of my primary safety patterns. All right, and the next one here is having a hard time receiving support, asking for help, or receiving compliments. And they're all, I'm just kind of lumping them together under the category of receiving. So typically, right, if we are supposed to be utterly self-reliant, not depend on anyone else, it can actually feel threatening to receive help, which is really weird, right? And so I know there are a lot of you out there actually probably aware that you even have this pattern, that you struggle with receiving, right? But It's really tough to actually break this pattern if you don't know why you created it in the first place. So hopefully, if this describes you and you have this sign or symptom, because you may not have all of them, you might if you're like me, and these certainly aren't all the signs and symptoms. I'm sure it can manifest in a bunch of different ways. So if you can come up with any, if you're a total self-reliant, independent person, and you fear depending on other people, I'd love for you to share any signs or symptoms you notice in yourself below. But this one I think is pretty pervasive. Having a hard time accepting support and an extremely difficult time asking for help. It's almost like we wouldn't even know if we needed help if it hit us on the head, because we'll just instantly, bandage our own head up and take care of ourselves and probably not even think about calling the doctor or, letting anyone know we were even hurt. It just doesn't occur to us if this pattern is really deeply ingrained. So if any of this describes you, then chances are you may have this pattern. But there's a sneaky, weird one that I want to describe that kind of is intertwined with this last one that I'm going to list here. This is the last one I'm going to list. That's a negative, and then I'm going to go into some of the positives. But I used to notice in myself, this was way before I actually figured out this pattern in its totality, but I used to notice in myself that anytime someone did something nice for me, I would recognize it. It was like, whoa, someone just helped me out. Someone just did me a favor. Someone just did something nice for me. And I would just get filled with anxiety. Like it's just very strange, right? You would think that, and I used to just think, I should be really grateful. I should thank them. What's wrong? What is wrong with me? Like the idea of thanking this person fills me with terror that's actually so strong, I feel like I might die if I utter the words thank you. And now I understand why, all these years later, because I noticed this in myself a long, long time ago, and I couldn't quite figure it out. It made no sense because I wanted to be a grateful person. I wanted to be someone who thanked other people when they did nice things. But I noticed how difficult it was for me. And now it makes sense. If I were to thank somebody, if I were to acknowledge that they actually did something nice for me, then, and I felt supported, and I actually let myself receive their help or their support or their love, then I would have to somehow admit that there are some people in the world that are dependable, right? That do nice things, that help me out. And that threatens this pattern, which at the nervous system level, our physiology, our biology believes we cannot let go of this nervous system pattern or we might die. So, at just the fundamental nervous system level, it makes sense. Logically, doesn't really make sense at all, right? But maybe you're like me and you went through something kind of extreme in your childhood where perhaps if you weren't so self-reliant, you might have died. I actually know that that's true of me now. I don't know I would have died if I weren't self-reliant, but I can look back and see plenty of opportunity for, extreme damage physically, emotionally, psychologically, way worse than I actually incurred if I hadn't turned to my own self for help, because nobody else was coming to my rescue. Nobody else was going to help me. And if I hadn't been able to turn to myself, something way worse might have happened. I don't know. Maybe I would have died. Not sure. So in seeing this about ourselves, we can have compassion. We don't have to judge the fact that we judge other people even, right? For being clingy and needy. We can kind of see how this pattern was created and why. And hopefully we can have compassion for other people too, realizing they have their own nervous system patterns. Being clingy and needy is itself probably a sign or symptom of a different type of nervous system pattern. So the final one that I wanted to talk about, just signs and symptoms, would be the positives, because I want to celebrate, if this is you, the amazing qualities that this pattern actually produces in people like us. So if this is you, what I know about you is you can get shit done. You can solve problems. You see possibility where other people see brick walls. You will not be stopped. You will figure out how to, get through something, how to figure something out, how to solve a problem. I have a sneaking suspicion many entrepreneurs, business owners, and just creative, inventive people are probably coming out of this pattern from childhood, because it puts you in a really creative problem-solving mode where no problem is too big to solve. Really, I mean, that's what total self-reliance does. When you look at yourself to solve all problems, then all problems in the world become solvable because you think you're the only dependable one. So there are some really, really good qualities to this nervous system pattern, and I want to honor that. So if this is you, I hope you're going to honor yourself for that. And then let's take a look at why we might want to interrupt this pattern. In my life, I've come to realize the older I get, connection and intimacy with people is really important. It's important for life. It's important for relationships. It's important for health, I think. So establishing healthy relationships, I think, necessitates being willing to depend on other people. Now, there's a difference between healthy dependency and unhealthy dependency. And I'm not going to go into unhealthy dependency, which would be that nervous system pattern of being maybe more clingy and needy. But I just want to talk about healthy dependency. We need each other as humans. We do. And this has been the hardest pattern for me to break. It really has. I've broken it with Stefan, and that's about it. I haven't yet figured out how to cultivate the types of friendships that I ultimately really long for. So that's still in process. So I'm sitting here in front of you, still in process with this pattern, still knowing it intimately, still seeing it kind of play out in a lot of areas of my life. So I think it can keep us lonely and isolated and maybe self-protected, and maybe we don't even realize the damage we're doing to ourselves, until some big thing happens in our life and really gets our attention here. So I want to talk to you now about ways you can break this pattern. So first and foremost, we have to realize that not all people are dependable, because you don't really want to switch this pattern up and go, cool, I'm going to depend on everybody and anybody, right? That's going to kind of swing to the polar opposite and probably won't have good results. And this pattern was created because we couldn't depend on certain people in our lives. It doesn't mean they're bad people. They have their own reasons for, and their own nervous systems for why they behaved the way they did in your childhood, whether it was your family, your parents, teachers, maybe, I don't know, other family members and adults in your life. But realizing, it makes sense I created this pattern. And I want to now look for the dependable people. So realizing, some people are not dependable. And I now know, I'm going to have radar for who I can depend on and who I can't. And building on this, I would say the next step would be to look for trustworthiness instead of monitoring the behavior of people in your life for the signs that they're actually not dependable or trustworthy. Because we tend to get in life what we focus on. And so if you actually switch this, it's like basically we're replacing that old pattern with this new one, which is the old pattern is I'm unconsciously looking for signs that they're not trustworthy. So now we're replacing it with a pattern that hopefully will automate, and then it can kind of work for us at the subconscious level again. But I want to look for trustworthiness. And then those are the people that I want to seek out. And this is the really cool thing to me about nervous system patterns is it's highly individual. So what I might find trustworthy in someone, you might find abhorrent for whatever reason. So you have to actually define trust for yourself and define dependability, right? For some people, it might be, and I'm going to be super cliche here, but I actually have a friend in mind that I'm thinking about right now who has made it clear to her, some of the men in her life when she was dating, I want to depend on you for income, and I want to be kind of a housewife or left free to be creative. That's her version of depending on somebody in a specific way. That would not be my version. I don't want that life. So you get to define this for yourself and on your own terms. So this would be a great time to look within and just figure out, interesting, like what actually builds trust with me? What are the signs that someone is trustworthy for me to be in relationship with? And what are the signs of a dependable person? All right, third would be practicing asking for help or support. And then when you get it, practicing profound gratitude, right? So this thing that before maybe felt almost life-threatening can become a practice ground for us of not only actually receiving and feeling what that feels like, but then being really grateful. And here's the thing, resist the urge to figure out how to pay that person back or do them an even bigger favor, because that is probably going to come up for you. So that's something I've noticed in myself is like, whoa, wow, can I really like fully receive this without already in the process of receiving? Like I'm actually like taking the gift from somebody, or I'm in the process of actually experiencing what they want to give me, and I'm already thinking about, okay, well, this is like, it's not like I have a point system, but this is a pretty big gift. I better do something as big or bigger in the next week or so, right? That it's just practice receiving, interrupt and stop any pattern in you of trying to pay it back. Because what that actually does, in my opinion, is it evens the scoreboard at the nervous system level, so you don't actually have to depend on them after all, because you're giving back to them. So, I'm a huge fan, of course, of giving to other people, but my preference is that if I'm going to give something to you, I want to give it freely. And then if you want to give it to me, cool. And I'm going to practice receiving. But nobody's keeping score. Nobody's, tracking who gave what and how big is it compared to whatever. Ugh, don't do that. Now, the next suggestion I have for you would be to actually tell the people in your life that mean the most to you, that you do actually look around and you realize they're pretty trustworthy. I would tell these people about this pattern if you're just now realizing it for the first time, so that they have an orientation of you in this way, and some of your behavior will start to make sense to them, and your relationships will probably improve. And who knows, maybe it'll even spark a conversation about nervous system patterns, and maybe they'll reveal something about themselves. I don't know. I'm just saying that would be a cool potential outcome, but I've benefited greatly from sharing this pattern with some of the people in my life, so that we know kind of what each other's patterns are, and then we can actually call each other out. Because I want, for example, Stefan to call me out if I'm acting from a place of not depending on him, at fear of depending on him, right? And the unhealthy version of this pattern. So I want him to call me out, and then, I want him to, be like, hey, just receive right now. You don't have to think about giving back or whatever. I don't know. We can work together. So if you have people in your life that you can share this with, then I encourage you to do that. And on that note, then, I would make room for the people in your life who you're beginning to allow to yourself to depend on. Make room for these people to be human and mess up, right? Because none of us are perfect. And so if you notice yourself going back into self-reliance because you attempted this whole relying on other people thing a little too much and it backfired and you got really disappointed, then you're going right back into the unhealthy pattern, right? So learn to have hard conversations with people, maybe be willing to share the disappointment without making them wrong. Realize that we're all human, forgive yourself, forgive them. It's just something to be aware of with this pattern because, as I have said probably 5 times already, none of us are perfect. So while we're in the practice of depending on other people, I think it's just really important to make room for the messiness of being human. And on that note, my last bullet point here for you on breaking this pattern is to get okay feeling disappointment sometimes, because that's part of life. Get okay, relying on people and maybe it not going the way you wanted it to go. Get okay telling the people in your life that you do want to depend on what that means for you. Because like I said earlier, you may look at this dependence and trustworthiness thing differently than your romantic partner, your friends, your family. So you might actually have to literally spell it out. Here's what trustworthiness is to me. Here's how I'm measuring trust, and be willing for that definition to be different than the other person's, right? And so sometimes it might actually require conversations and, again, working on this together, because this particular nervous system pattern kind of requires participation with other humans to break it. Certainly, we can break it in ourselves in relation to the people in our lives, but if we don't have even one person working with us to break it, where we're actually practicing receiving, we're practicing them being a dependable person for us, not just in their own life, right? But for us, with us, then what's the point, right? Because then you're just back to self-reliance and you're like stuck in the thing of, oh, I'm going to break this pattern for myself. I don't need anyone else to break this pattern with me. I got it. I can solve this, right? And you're actually just reinforcing the same pattern. And there you have it. That is my fairly extensive, based on personal experience, summary of this pattern of total self-reliance when we don't believe we can depend on other people. And I'd love to hear from you now. I'd love to hear if this resonates with you, if this is you, if you have maybe some signs or symptoms in your life that aren't on my list. This could potentially help somebody else. And maybe this pattern isn't you, but it's helped you understand someone else in your life that maybe has this pattern. Wherever you're at, I'd love to hear from you by, just sharing your thoughts below. If you have any questions for me on this particular nervous system pattern or nervous system patterns in general, if you have a specific nervous system pattern in mind or something coming up for you that you would like me to potentially film a video on, please share that as well. I will be looking in the comments for that. And if it stands out as a good possible video, then I may take your topic and run with it and film a video for you. So thank you so much for watching. I really love this topic of nervous system patterns. I have a whole series, so if you're new here and you're just stumbling upon this video, then make sure to check the other ones out that I have on nervous system patterns. We're doing a whole series on them. And yeah, I'm just excited to talk about this more and more and dive more into it with you. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.